Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. On the night of July 16th, 2024, I once again subjected myself to watching the grand finale of Star Wars The Acolyte on Disney+. The 8th and thankfully last episode finally premiered, and it was so awful that I literally burst out laughing towards the end of it because of just how utterly and completely stupid and cringeworthy this entire episode is. And I think that Harvey Weinstein's former personal assistant, Leslye Headland, should have named the episode Revenge of the Cringe, because I'm not sure how some of the actors managed to speak their cringeworthy lines of dialogue that she wrote. But before proceeding, I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please share the video on social media, please subscribe to support this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! Also on July 16th, I released a video talking about just how bad the show's actual viewership numbers are as reported for its first 3 episodes by Nielsen. Sadly, I'll have to wait for another 5 weeks before the Nielsen numbers are available for this week's episode, so that I'll have a complete picture for the viewership of the entire series. And I'll be honest, I don't know whether enough people will actually stream this final episode enough so that it will even be reported in Nielsen's top 10 original shows, because Nielsen won't report the viewership numbers that fall below the top 10. But we'll find out in 5 weeks. So episode 8 begins where episode 6 left off, because the entirety of last week's episode 7 was just a rehash of episode 3, which was also a flashback, as I had talked about in a video that I had released last week. And if you recall what occurred in episode 6, on board the Jedi ship, Jedi Master Sol, as played by the actor Jung-jae, had discovered that he had May with him and not her twin sister Osha, who are both played by the actress Amandla Stenberg, who thinks she's God's gift to humanity. And Sol still has May restrained at the beginning of episode 8, just as was shown towards the end of episode 6. But she has the reprogrammed mini-droid named Pip with her, which she uses to escape the restraints. She then manages to get onto an escape pod and leaves the ship. Naturally, Sol chases after her, and for absolutely no given reason, Basil ups and decides to sabotage the ship's electronics while Sol is chasing May, causing him to lose control while flying through the planet's ring system. And I do want to point out that while flying through a ring system might look interesting on film, in practice, doing so would very likely cause significant damage to any ship, because their very high speeds would result in numerous very high impact collisions that would undoubtedly damage both the ship's hull and its windows. So in other words, it's not a smart thing to do. And in reality, it's just an overdose of needless fluff special effects that are more than likely going to be detrimental to an audience's ability to suspend their disbelief. But in spite of all of that, May and Sol each land on the planet of Brendok. So just as I said in a video that I had released 2 weeks ago in which I reviewed episode 6, I said towards the end of that video that Sol was very likely taking May back to Brendok, and that's exactly what happened in this very predictable show. Sol lands a lot closer to the lesbian space witch's abandoned fortress, and since none of them are there, we can only assume that they did all in fact die at the end of episode 3. And that leads to several unanswered questions in this poorly written show regarding May, who was left alone as a child 16 years earlier. Such as, how did she manage to stay alive? How did she eventually leave the planet? Maybe the lesbian space witch's spaceship that they had obviously used to travel to Brendok in the first place was still there and intact, but how then did May learn how to pilot it by herself? Did she move and bury the 50 or so bodies of the dead lesbian space witches all by herself, including her dead mother's body? Maybe she managed to do that by using her force push capabilities. At no point in this series does May ever talk about being left all alone on Brendok, unless she had not been left all alone, which might suggest that maybe she and several surviving lesbian space witches eventually left the planet together. In reality, these are gaping plot holes that potentially damage an audience's ability to suspend their disbelief, and the fault for that rests solely with Leslye Headland and her poor writing. Had May talked about having to bury the dead body of her and Osha's mother, that likely would have generated a lot more sympathy for her character, but Headland clearly never considered that, since she was probably more consumed with ideological messaging and not good storytelling or good writing. But going back to episode 8, as Sol is exploring the ruined fortress, he repeatedly calls out May's name, and then sees another spaceship coming in for a landing. Yes, it's Osha and Qimir, as played by Manny Jacinto, who are traveling together in his ship, even though she still doesn't actually want to be trained by him, as she told him earlier in this poorly edited episode back on Qimir's hideout that I dubbed Gilligan's Island. Then Qimir, who's wearing his Darth Smiley Face helmet again, pops out of nowhere inside of the fortress and begins an all-out lightsaber battle with Sol, which is technically the best part of this entire final episode, but it only goes downhill from there. May, who also found her way into the abandoned and ruined fortress, is in her old bedroom that she had shared with Osha when they were children. It's also where she had threatened to kill Osha, and just outside of the door is where she had also started the fire. So when Osha then walks into her old bedroom, she and May have a chit-chat while Sol and Qimir are still lightsaber dueling outside. Then, talking about Sol in an exposition, Osha says, "He tried to teach me to accept that someone that I love could be capable of this level of destruction. And I failed. I could never learn to calm my negative emotions, my hatred of you, my grief over our mother. So I never became a Jedi. And I guess in the end, you got what you wanted." Then May gives her own exposition saying, "Sol killed our mother. I saw it with my own eyes. He's lied to you every day since you left our home. How could he teach you to control your negative emotions? He's the reason you have them. You didn't fail. He did." Yes, Leslye Headland was determined to blame Sol for everything in this series. He's a man after all. Then Osha starts to physically fight May in their old bedroom as the fighting between Qimir and Sol continues outside. But Sol gets the upper hand and manages to destroy Qimir's lightsaber, so they stop fighting just as another ship flies overhead. Yes, that's right, it's Vernestra Rwoh, as played by Leslye Headland's wife, Rebecca Henderson, the secondary Jedi character of Mog, as played by Harry Trevaldwyn, and about another dozen or so other unnamed Jedi extras. Leslye Headland introduced the character of Mog in episode 6 after she had two other secondary Jedi characters, Sol's Padawan Jeki and the annoying Yord Fandar, killed by Qimir in episode 5. As I had talked about in a video that I had released 3 weeks ago. Jedi characters are essentially about a dime a dozen for Leslye Headland in this series. She continually throws them in or disposes of them willy-nilly to her heart's content, and the vast majority are just unimportant, unnamed background characters that don't necessarily add anything to the story or make it feel more like Star Wars because they're pointless. Osha then gets momentarily distracted as she looks up through a conveniently placed hole in the ceiling that's directly over where she's standing, and she sees the same ship as it conveniently flies directly over the hole. Yes, it was rather contrived, but it gives May the opportunity to run away, which is what she always does and is as predictable as the sun rising in the east every morning. So May runs down to where Qimir and Sol have stopped fighting, but Qimir wants May to kill him, to which she says, "I want him to confess what he did. I want him to face the High Council, the Senate, the Republic. I want him to pay for his crimes." Yet she didn't want that for Indara or Smelly Master Torben, who she killed in the first 2 episodes of this awful series, so her comments come across as being very disingenuous. When does a known murderer suddenly want justice in the real world? This is yet more bad writing from Leslye Headland. But Sol says, "I did the right thing. I wanted to protect you." To which May asks, "From what?" And not only does he not answer her question, he has never said at any point in this series what exactly he's been trying to protect them from. So he misdirects, just as their mother did when he was questioning her 16 years ago. He says, "You are not twins. You and Osha are the same person. I don't know how your mother did it, but it has something to do with a virgins on this planet." Then May asks how she did what? To which Sol replies, "She created life, your lives. I believe she used the Force to create you and Osha. Do you have any idea what kind of power that is? In the history of the galaxy, very few have been that powerful." And May says, "And you killed her. You killed our mother." And Sol confesses saying, "Yes, I did." Naturally, Osha has been standing nearby the entire time and heard Sol say that. So she asks, "Is that true?" And Sol says, "I was protecting you. It was the right thing to do." And Osha asks, "If it was the right thing to do, why didn't you tell the Jedi?" And Sol responds, "Without May, there was no proof you were created in this way." And Osha asks, "Why didn't you tell me?" To which Sol says, "They would have sent you away. You were too old to train. They never would have let you become a Jedi. I did what I thought was best for you. Of course, I wanted to tell you so many times, but I couldn't." Then Osha says, "Stop talking." But Sol says, "I kept this from you so that you could have the life you'd always dreamed of. I did everything because I..." And then he starts to choke because Osha starts to force choke him and again says to him, "Stop talking." Then she kills him, and when she picks up his blue lightsaber, it turns red. Conveniently, all of that happens before Vernestra Rwoh, Mog, and the dozen or so unnamed and ultimately unimportant Jedi extras arrive at the fortress and immediately engage its elevator that Osha had fixed earlier. So when they get to the abandoned living area of the fortress, they find Sol's body, but no one else. Osha and May had snuck out by climbing down into the shaft where the catwalk bridge had collapsed 16 years earlier, because there's a handy-dandy ventilation shaft that goes outside at ground level. How convenient, contrived, and not compelling. Just more bad writing by Leslye Headland. So for those of you who watched my video reviews for the Ahsoka series last year, you may recall me saying that I could not in any way describe the show as being compelling. Well, if you've watched my video reviews for this series, I have also never used the word compelling to describe this series either. Because it's not, even though it was marketed as being a mystery series. In reality, the Acolyte is the opposite of compelling. It's soulless, derivative, and uninspired. Anyway, Qimir is still in the fortress, and he's not far from Vernestra while he's not wearing his Darth Smiley Face helmet. So sure enough, given the whip-like scar on his back, yes, Qimir was a former pupil of Vernestra Rwoh. So he quickly puts his Darth Smiley Face helmet back over his head so that she can no longer sense him. And he then sneaks out and walks over to the yellow bunta tree to find Osha and May. Osha, now that she's fully turned to the dark side, agrees to go off with Qimir, and May wants him to erase her memory, which he does, much like the character of Gilderoy Lockhart in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, who was gifted with memory charms. So May is taken by the Jedi and she gets to spend some quality time with Vernestra Rwoh at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, but Vernestra is, above all else, a gifted politician. And Vernestra concocts a story for visiting senators who want to know about the dead Jedi. So she tells them that a rogue Jedi named Sol killed all of them. And as I had mentioned at the start of this video, that was the point that I burst out laughing, because of the absurdity of how much Leslye Headland was so determined to portray the Jedi as the most unpleasant and untrustworthy assholes in the entire Star Wars universe. She genuinely hates the Jedi, and I think she genuinely hates the Star Wars universe too, because she very clearly wants to transform it into a reflection of her own sad life. Anyone who loves Star Wars would never have portrayed the Jedi Order as negatively as how this show was written. Thus, how Leslye Headland demonized the Jedi Order says far more about herself than anything else. And given how much she clearly hated her own childhood, as I have theorized in several of my earlier review videos for this series, my belief that she conflated the Jedi Order to her parents' church, which I strongly believe that she utterly detested, shows just how much she truly hates everything that George Lucas ever created, including the Jedi Order. Why have this noble group of beings devoted to maintaining peace throughout the galaxy when you can instead portray them as being the epitome of corruption? I laughed because Leslye Headland was incredibly determined to make a mockery of George Lucas's vision of the Jedi Order once and for all by replacing it with her own hate-filled vision to make them appear as corrupt as possible, to include blaming all of the bad events that occurred throughout this series on Soul. But not satisfied to leave it at that, she also has Vernestra Rwoh go and visit Jedi Master Yoda. If you watched any of my earliest videos on this series before it premiered in June, I said that I didn't know whether or not Yoda would make an appearance. Well, he did, but only from the back of his head, and he had no lines. So just a glimpse of him, much like how Luke Skywalker, as played by Mark Hamill, only appeared at the very end of Jar Jar Abrams' movie Star Wars VII: The Force Awakens, and he had 0 lines because Kathleen Kennedy truly detests the character of Luke Skywalker, who Ruan Johnson would later destroy in his garbage movie Star Wars VIII: The Last Jedi. So now, in The Acolyte, Leslye Headland wants to bring the Jedi's total corruption to the most beloved Jedi of all time, Yoda. Why? Because Yoda, like Soul, is male, and he's part of George Lucas's dreaded patriarchy that Kathleen Kennedy has made no secret that she completely and utterly hates in her Force is Female reimagined garbage version of Star Wars. The Acolyte further erodes what George Lucas created, and I think that was a lot of what Kathleen Kennedy wanted from this series. But going back to the episode, it shows Qimir and Osha holding each other's hands as well as a lightsaber as they watch the sunset over Gilligan's Island, and the sexual subtext was beyond obvious. Who's going to strap on the lightsaber tonight, honey? There was also some creepy thing lurking in a cave entrance on Gilligan's Island, and I don't know what it was, nor do I actually care. But it's very clear that Leslye Headland wants to do a second season of this awful show. My only hope is that it doesn't ever happen. The only thing that I'm grateful for is that this painful-to-watch series is finally over, but I am planning to do a more comprehensive final review of this entire series and its myriad of problems that were all created by Leslye Headland. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.